What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review Podcast, the podcast that has a soft spot for raising standards. I'm Matthew O'Neill, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, and chairwomen. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We discuss the innovation that leads to success in this country, and we also get their take on the current political and economic state of the nation. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear Jonathan White's exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course, current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Tom Milborn, Director of Seacote Caravan Park. Tom, welcome.
Hello.
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast today. We might as well get stuck straight in. It's been a few months since Seacote Caravan Park appeared in the Parliamentary Review. What has happened in the ensuing months?
Well, there have been winter months when we are going through a quieter spell in terms of holiday trade. So what we do is that we, during these months, we spend them upgrading and refurbing and maintaining and departing with old caravans and bringing new ones on and generally getting the site ready for Easter, which is in, 4 weeks' time.
Now, of course, it sounds like it's a very busy time for you with all this
yes,
ongoing
it's busy time. Yes, it is. Oh, yes, but there's always plenty of work to do on caravan parks during the winter months.
Now, are these items that you are planning long term? Do you identify these issues throughout the year and then go after them in this quiet period, or is this something that just things that pop up?
Well, there's two things really. Yes. One is sort of planned maintenance improvement. So what we do is that sort of before winter comes, we decide, right, what needs improved, what needs, extended or refurbed. So we plan that in. And also, of course, there are jobs that come along out of necessity, repairs and emergencies, that also get, because in winter we're right on the seafront, and so we do get some extreme weather, and so therefore repair jobs reveal themselves in winter, which we have to do sort of straight away. So there's two types of jobs that we get pretty well tied up with.
Now, a lot of time has passed since you acquired Seacote Park in 1977. What has changed in the industry, and what has stayed the same in that period of time?
Well, people's expectations are much higher now. Back in 1977, caravans were very much summer use only. And people, they just weren't used in winter. There was no central heating. Some of them just had open wood or coal fires. They didn't have bathrooms. They didn't have double glazing or full insulation. And they were very much just a summer a place to come in the summer while the weather was good. But now, families now have time off all the year round. And while summer is still the busier time of the two, we do get quite a lot of visitors now in winter. And so because of that, caravans now have full central heating, double glazing, insulation, indoor bathrooms and shower rooms, and they're very, very comfortable for winter use. And I know that Christmas and New Year, for example, can be one of the busier weeks of the year. So they've changed a lot in that regard. Also, another thing is that in summer, people would generally come for a week or a fortnight's holiday. Now, they'll come just for a weekend, Friday afternoon till Sunday afternoon or something, and just a little getaway, almost taken at the, without preparation. Oh, come on, we'll go away for the weekend. And they just decide and come at the last minute. So all of that has changed.
And what stayed the same within the industry?
What stayed the same?
Mm-hmm.
Well, people's expectations are still the same. They still want, they're still paying good money, so they want good service, nice, clean caravans, and they want us, to be around to sort out any problems that may arise. So they're very much still the same, and so you've got to maintain, the standards that have always been there.
Now, as well as looking after 600 static caravans across 4 holiday parks, you also run a 70-room hotel and employ 60 staff. That's a lot to balance. What are the greatest challenges with running your business?
Well, there's lots of challenges. These are all they're all seasonal businesses. So you've got to plan your cash flow carefully, because in winter you tend not to make very much money. You spend a lot in winter on improvement and repairs and refurbishment and so on. So you've still got a full complement of staff, but your income is nowhere near as much. And November, January, February are usually loss-making months, so you've got to plan your cash flow accordingly. Mm-hmm. You've got to make sure you're setting money aside in the good months to cover you for over the lean months and so on. So that's something that's very important, and I know it's something that I'm often passing on to people who are starting off their own business, and they come asking for advice. And that's one thing I always remind them about. Put money away during the good times, so it's there, because harder times will surely follow.
So it's financial prudence.
I think so, yeah.
Do you feel that a lot of... Please, go ahead.
It's easy to spend money because it's there, and you forget about tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that a lot of inexperienced, businesses often fall by.
Do you feel that a lot of people coming into the world of work these days have a lack of financial acuity? Yes,
there is a tendency with a lot of people to buy or borrow to buy, in anything that they may fancy, and I feel that a lot of younger people, especially, that they borrow for everything, and it's all right as long as they've got a good, well-paid job and they can cope with it. But if things, if there's a downturn and they find they've got a lot of debt, on the credit cards or hire purchase or mortgage or, everything these days can be bought on credit. And I'm not sure that is a good thing.
Do you think that this is something that we need to have more education about in school, better financial...
Yes, I mean, obviously, borrowing to buy a house or many other things, yes, it is. No, it's a good thing. Obviously, it is essential. And obviously, if you didn't borrow, then you'd probably never be able to buy a house or a new motor car or something. But I think it's very, very easy to go over the top. And you do hear of people who've got all sorts of credit cards and there's debt on all of them, and they owe for this and they're paying that off and so on and so forth. And I sometimes wonder, well, I hope things stay going well for them, because in a downturn, they could find themselves not being able to cope.
Now, in your best practice article, you say the secret to your success is never remaining complacent. How do you constantly improve whilst motivating your staff?
Well, it's a tricky one. You can never sit back and say, right, everything's going well. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. There's that sort of feeling you can get. But there is an old saying that there's nothing more constant than change, and change is happening all the time, increasingly so. New legislation, new practices, new methods of booking systems, all computerized, all online, and so on and so forth. And really, you can't be complacent and say, right, we've always done it this way, we'll carry on. You just can't do that. You've got to be ever ready for these new changes that are coming. And I'm quite lucky, because my son, who's quite a bit younger than me, and my daughter-in-law, who are both in the business with me, they're the ones that I can fall back on, and they're much more ready up on to cope with all these changes and not to be complacent. Keep us abreast of things.
Now, of course, you also mentioned that one of your biggest challenges is your proximity to a nuclear plant. How does that affect you, and how do you overcome this?
Well, Sellafield is the nuclear plant in question, and it's just down the road from us, about 5-6 miles down the road. Sellafield did at one stage develop a very poor image, and the public, the whole country, the whole world knew about Sellafield and some of the leaks it was having and the problems and so on. And it had a detrimental effect on visitors to this area. And being in the tourist trade, we suffered from Sellafield's poor image. Now, since then, I must say over the last 10, 15 years, Sellafield's image has improved enormously. They have spent a lot of money and time on sorting out things that went wrong and leaks and so on. And they are now, quite, I think it's fair to say that they are now a positive influence on our area, whereas 10, 15, 20 years ago, they certainly weren't. And so it's one that has turned down a bit. They do have the negative side still. I mean, most people that live in our area are employed at Sellafield, so there is a lot more traffic on these country roads and so on that that you can do without sometimes. Things like that, because it is a big place But as I say, it does have a positive effect as well, because it puts a lot of money into the area and creates a lot of valuable employment. And a lot of our customers, in one way or another, are involved at Solarfield.
Mm. Now, of course, the world is full of all kinds of challenges, not just the ones that we are used to facing day in and day out. At the news at the moment, of course, is the talk of the coronavirus. Do you feel that this will impact your business?
Yes, I think we can already see. You'll have heard of staycation.
Yes.
This is when people decide not to go abroad for their holidays, but to stay in Britain. Well, I mean, Easter is now, 4 or 5 weeks away. And I think it's fair to say that we are filling up quite fast already.
Right.
And I suspect quite a bit of that is to do with people who would otherwise have gone abroad for the Easter weekend, but this year they've decided to stay at home.
So it's had a very positive effect for your business.
Yes, at the moment, I think I can see a positive effect in that regard. Yes, obviously, on the other side of things, we don't know how far this is going to spread.
Right.
It could affect our staff or some of them, and so on and so forth. We've got to wait and see how it goes here. But so there could be a downside. But I think any signs I can see at the moment are probably on the positive side, with customers, staying in Britain instead of going abroad.
Now, of course, there are challenges of many sorts. What are the greatest challenges that you believe will affect your industry in the next 10 years?
Right. Well, that's a good one, really. I think it's difficult to predict. I mean, the last 10 years have been quite good. The economy's been good, and people, I've seen that there's been more spending money around and so on. A lot more very ordinary sort of families, if I can call them that, coming in and buying caravans and so on, which is good. Whether that will continue, I don't know. Let's wait and see what happens to Brexit and the negotiations and so on that comes out of that. I'm quietly confident, to be honest. I think I am an optimist at heart, and I would tend to feel that the next 10 years will be all right. Okay, but just how much all right and so on. I'm sure there will be a downside to part of it, but I think generally, one's got to be optimistic and see what comes. That's
always a good attitude to have within business, because
yes,
pessimism is just really an anathema to profit. Now, the holiday industry is one of Britain's largest income streams. What do you feel the government could do to help it succeed even further?
Right. Well, obviously, invest in Britain is a good thing. And things like the Northern Powerhouse and the new HS2 rail service, Heathrow extension, so on and so forth. These can only be good for Britain. I would like to see investment spreading north a bit. I mean, London's a marvellous city, and it's got so much going for it for tourists. And because of that, most things seem to happen in London. I would like to see it spreading north, because we're on the fringe of the Lake District. which is a wonderful area to visit. And I would like to see, investment and so on to encourage people to come further north, and where we will all benefit, and there'll be less concentration on, say, places like London. I would like to see that.
Now, quite unfortunately, our time together is drawing to its close, Tom. But before I let you go, what does the next 12 months have in store for Seacote Caravan Park?
Well, this winter, we've invested substantial funds in improvements and replacements, and to bring us more up to speed and more competitive. And I would like to think that some of that will start paying off. I think we will start seeing a return on some of that investment. Obviously, it's perhaps more in the longer term than just over the next 12 months, for years to come. Because, as I said before, my son and daughter-in-law are now in the business, and they're going to take it on when I retire. And so clearly, we are investing and looking not just 1 year ahead. We're looking 10, 15, 20 years ahead. And I think it'll put us in a good place to compete into the short-term future and in the longer term as well.
Well, Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your insights. Tom, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
I hope that you enjoyed our chat with Tom Milborn, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Seacote Caravan Park are continuing to raise standards. And now, if you haven't heard it before, is Jonathan White's exclusive interview with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Lord Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexologist. That's flags to you and I. And now, Jonathan White's interview.
Lord Pickles, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. Given your experience over those years, what thoughts have you had over the last few weeks and months about the current political situation the country finds itself in?
Situation is quite dire because we have a parliament that is by and large useless. It's like a bored teenager on a long drive, and it knows what it doesn't want, and it's so bored with Brexit, but it can't agree. So no matter what you put up, it's against it. Are you in favour of a referendum? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of remaining within the single market? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of... No, I don't want to do that. No. And are you in favour of leaving without a deal? No, we don't want to do that. So it's against everything, but there isn't enough votes to be in favour of something. And it could be by the time this podcast goes out that Boris has started on the process of the bill, because we'll be voting on that today. But even then, what people don't seem to understand, this is not the end of Brexit.
Right.
This is barely opening the door of Brexit. We've got years of negotiations about trade agreements, relationships with Europe, putting down pieces of legislation. We get our agriculture, our fisheries, our financial services into place. Brexit is going to go on and on and on and on.
Forward to it.
I'm sure we are.
Now, the question is, I should actually remind listeners that we are talking on the day that the second reading of the European Withdrawal Act will take place. So, as we speak, we don't quite know. As perhaps like the government front bench don't know what's going to happen. you compare Parliament to a petulant teenager. What do you do to a petulant teenager to sort it out? Is there a chance that it will see sense and push this through this bill without making amendments? Is there a chance it will vote for its own for a general election? How do you see this playing out at the moment?
The sensible thing will be to put this deal through, because I've always been of the view a deal is better than no deal, because this is just the beginning. In order to start the process of Brexit, start the process of the United Kingdom taking over powers that it's not really exercised for 40 odd years, the smart thing is to get this thing through now. But in a way, it's not about Brexit itself. If there was a free vote, this deal would have gone through. Mrs May's deal would have gone through. But it's about politics. It's about a Labour Party that thinks it has a chance, trying to make the Prime Minister, whether it was Theresa May or Boris Johnson, look as though that they are in office but not in power, of delaying as long as possible. There's a lot of talk about an election in the autumn, maybe back end of November, beginning of December, something for us to look forward to before Christmas. It's beginning to look less likely. It's beginning to look as though they might want to drag it into spring to get as far away as possible from the rather decisive moment that Boris came back with a deal. We have to remind ourselves that nobody thought he could deliver a deal, and it does quite shock them. And if you remember, all this process went through in order to ensure that we were left without a deal. When we have a deal, suddenly, oh no, it's not that kind of deal. We don't want that kind of deal. We want something different.
I think the vast majority of people in this country, whether Remain or Leave, now would be very satisfied for this to come to a amiable conclusion. And as you correctly just said, because when it does come to those in the opposition who claim to want this to end, and then introduce wrecking amendments, they introduce new objections to it, the general public are getting quite frustrated.
But you've got to understand that quite a lot of people don't get beyond a small area within Westminster, sometimes cliche referred to as the Westminster bubble, and go back to their own patch. Now, by and large, everybody hates their MP, except when they're at home, doing the fairs, wandering around, helping people. So they, in a way, they're cosseted to that great, which I feel is coming as a tsunami of change.
You were, of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you resident there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshireman, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? You hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament, because you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want, and I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership. Well, I was
used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians are uninterested, because honestly, as you all know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
No, I think so, and and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay people to be members, and it's a way of not being beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow chairman, Lord Blunkett, has said, what some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Oh, absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was
At
it?
the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
Oh, so I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it that moved you from radical Marxists to running the only inner city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I'll join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around, and my family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to it. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed, but I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story, most people might guess that a dynamo Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office, but who is it that you have?
I had Che Guevara. Which I always had him over my left shoulder for visitors, and they always used to you see their eyes going up and thinking, I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Bunk was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives would never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, for something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realised that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road at Cardinal Place, a fantastically new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment, do you think, in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state. And it was on the basis of tough love. It was on the basis of getting people into jobs. It was about dealing with the kind of the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress, since of course you're stepped down being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, because you're the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech that we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like that goes in the state to repress. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old maids cycling to evensong and war-bane. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit of stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large, they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work. You're also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let the listeners know what projects you are working on with that, and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country?
Well, I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you reference as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, after so many years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it was like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death camps. And we need to kind of understand the Anstalt-Gruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. And the hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away, it's something I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine you were actually very content and happy. Former Prime Minister, friend and colleague David Cameron just released his book, and you were quite unscathed from it.
I came out, he was very nice about it. I even bought the audio version because he was reading it, and he obviously, but there was a fair bit of affection, and I'm rather glad they left out one or two of the other embarrassing things.
Maybe another time.
Yeah.
But it's important, I think. And I'm conscious of time, but I think it's important that today people have become so perhaps caught up in what's happening in this country regarding Brexit. Looking to the future, what would you say that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to?
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it would be good to get through Brexit over the coming years, and it would be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle. Those have been left behind by our economic progress, and it would be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know that's going to be a huge focus of the next review. Pickles, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope that you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, let's raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.